Hey guys, Mr. Morgan here with another remote learning instructional video. Today is 11/2, November 2nd. What we are doing today is we have our second to last day of the political unit, which is going to be doing a political quiz and seeing who our ideas and who our opinions best line up with, which political party they best line up with. And then afterwards, we are going to be talking about the Egyptian pantheon or the Egyptian gods and mythology. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that we have today is the political unit. So this is our second to last day. Tomorrow is going to be our election. November 3rd is election day, which means that it is the day that the majority of the votes will be coming in, and normally it's when we find out who, for the most part, will win the general election and the electoral college and who will be the next president of the United States of America. It's also when we find out who will be the people in charge of the state of Indiana for the next 2 to 4 years. So what we're going to do first, before we take our actual election and do our vote, is we will take what is called a political ideology quiz. So we will see which political party in the United States of America, not just the two main parties, but also several of the smaller third parties or alternative parties, we will see which of our views line up best with them and which of the candidates line up best with our views and our opinions. So you will be given a link to a website where you will take an online quiz, and you will be told who you side best with, and then there is just a small worksheet. All you need to do is tell me who your results were for, which political party, which political leader, and then it's just whether or not this is what you thought, whether you're surprised by anything, and then go ahead, submit it, and that'll be all for today. And then the next day we have our general election. So go ahead, do that, and then we can get started on today's notes over ancient Egypt and Egyptian mythology. So now we're moving on to our Egyptian notes for today. What we are talking about today when it comes to ancient Egypt is the Egyptian pantheon, or their gods, and what we now consider Egyptian mythology. So Egypt, or for the most part, all of ancient Egypt, would be polytheistic. This means that they pray or have many different gods rather than one singular god. So they would have a god for a number of different things, like the god of harvest, the river, death, life, motherhood, all sorts of different things. The earth, the sky, and heavens would all have a different god or goddess. So we are going to explore 13 of the main important gods. There are upwards of hundreds of different gods that we see in the Egyptian pantheon. And so while we can't cover all of them, we can cover some of the more important or more popular, more prayed to gods in the Egyptian pantheon. So let's go ahead and get started. So there is a worksheet that you will fill out. With it, all you need to do is, I have the name of the god or goddess, and you will put the description of the god. So something like what they are the god of, and then what they ruled over or their responsibilities, and then you will give you will write down their appearance. So with the first of our 13, we're going to start with some of the important or the supreme gods, the ones that we see at the top of our pantheon. This would be Ra. So the god Ra is the great sun god. He is the supreme lord, the creator god who ruled over the land of the living and the dead. This is often equated to like a Zeus, who rules over all of the rest of the gods. He is the god of the gods. He is also the sun god, so he's incredibly important. The supreme god is one that is changing fairly often when it comes to Egyptian mythology. We see it change from certain ones to others. This is the one that like the Pharaoh and the majority of Egypt would like pray to. So Ra is often appearing as a man with the head of a falcon, and then behind his head would be a solar disk or like a circle, which would represent the sun, and then around that solar disk would be a serpent. So you can see a man with the head of a falcon, and then a circle representing the sun or behind his head, and then a serpent surrounding that disk. Next, we have Amun. The god Amun is the god of the sun and air. He would be the patron of Thebes. Thebes would be one of the two major cities that we see at this in ancient Egypt. It would be the capital center of the Egyptian kingdom or empire. It would change between two different places. One would be Thebes. The patron means that he is the essentially like the protector, the main god in this city. So at time he would also be the supreme king of the gods. So Amun is often depicted as appearing as a man wearing a crown with two tall plumes in it. So a crown for the supreme king of the gods with two tall plumes in it. Next we have Mut. Mut or Mut is our first goddess. So this is the mother god. Mut means mother in Egyptian. She would guard over people in life and throughout their entire lives. She is also the wife of Amun. So this is the first that we see relationships between different gods. And we're going to see later how they give birth to other gods later on down the road. So Mut is often depicted as a woman wearing two crowns. So the two crowns would represent Upper and Lower Egypt, which were two separate kingdoms, which would then be united in what would make the Egyptian kingdom or the Egyptian empire. And so the two crowns would represent Upper and Lower Egypt. So from Ra, we can see a number of different gods come from all these three main gods that we first talked about. We can see a number of different gods be born of them, and so we're going to see three that we're going to talk about come from Ra. So the first we have is Hathor, Hathor. This is another goddess. She is the called the Mistress of the West. She is another mother god. What her main job would be to welcome the dead into the afterlife. She is also considered the helper of women during pregnancy, or the Lady of Heaven, Earth, and the Underworld. So Hathor is one that is seen in a couple of different images. She is either seen as a cow. She is seen as a cow with a sun behind her, or she is seen as a woman with cow horns and then a sun disk between her two horns. Later, those two things would be combined, and we would see her as shown as a woman with the head of a cow and then the sun disk behind her. So Hathor is the Mistress of the West. She would be sent to destroy all of humanity by Ra, and then she would later become, she would be stopped, and then she would become the welcomer to the underworld or the afterlife. So she would be one of many who would guide people to the afterlife. This is going to be a common theme that we see in a couple later on down the road. Next we have Sekhmet, Sekhmet. This is the goddess of war and healing. So she would watch over the pharaohs during war, and along with Hathor, she would be tasked by Ra to wipe out a majority of the population in Egypt and surrounding areas. She would be the bringer of plagues. So one of the things about plagues is they would kill off a lot of people in the area, sicknesses, things like that. And so it was believed that Sekhmet gifted these plagues to the enemy Nubians in areas, and this was asked of her by Ra, and then she would later be stopped and would mainly watch over pharaohs as they went into battle. So Sekhmet is often appearing as a woman with the head of a lion, a female lion. So not a lion with a big mane, but like more like Nala in The Lion King. So a woman with the head of a lioness. So our last one for this section is Mat, M-A'-A-T. This is the goddess of truth, justice, and harmony. So another goddess. This one would be one that would go about with you forever. It would be with you the entire time you are alive, walking the earth. Mat is not just a goddess, but it is also an idea. So it is that of harmony. So with everything good, there is something bad. This idea kind of goes in with Sekhmet from earlier. Sekhmet would bring plagues, but she would also take them away and allow life to continue on. So Mat would be this idea that everything has a purpose and you must always do what is right and what is most harmonious and best for the world. So Mat would be depicted as a woman wearing a crown of an ostrich feather. Okay, so now we have two slightly different gods and goddesses. These two depict the sky and the earth. So they are somewhat separate from this first sort of familial dynasty sort of line that we see with Ra, Amun, Mut, and then our three that we just talked about. So the sky goddess, or Nut is the sky goddess who personified the canopy of the heavens. So when you think about the stars that you see above, she would be the one that would encapsulate all of the stars and would be stretching from one side of the earth to the other, and would be the one that would be like a protective net over all of the earth. So Nut is the wife of Geb, who is earth, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and is mother of the what would later be called the first five gods. So what we have talked about so far are mostly primordial gods. So they come from the original god, are created, and they create essentially everything else. Now we have Nut and Geb, who are the sky and the earth, and would create the later would be the main five, or the first five gods. So Nut is the mother of Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus. So Nut is often depicted in pictures as the sky and stars, but she is depicted as a woman bending over, arching over the entire earth. So the story goes that Ra was so disgusted by Nut and Geb's love that he did the best that he could to separate them. He sent someone to go and meet with the two, and when they came back and told the story of Nut and Geb, Ra was so disgusted that he stretched them as far apart as he could, but they would not let go. And so we have this entire open area, which is essentially like the sky and the earth that we live on. And then Geb would be the earth, and Nut would be pulled away from Geb and would create this sky that was essentially everything that they ever saw, because the Egyptians spread out a large area, but they didn't get to explore everywhere. So now moving on to Geb. Geb is the god of the earth and the husband of Nut. He would also be the father of many of the first five gods. So he is depicted as the earthly plane, while Nut is arched or stretched Geb would be mostly depicted as laying down. He's also often appearing green, sometimes with like trees and grass and bushes and stuff growing out of him, because he's supposed to depict the earth. So he is green with vegetation and laying down as his wife Nut is spreading away from him. So now we're going to talk about three of the first five gods. So first we have Isis. Isis would be the mother of everything living and dead, later known as the mother of the gods and one of the first five gods, actually the second born of the first five gods. Isis would be depicted as a woman with a staff and a headdress with a throne atop it. So because she is the mother of everything, she is the one that is responsible for everything, and without her there is nothing else. She is the reason that we get to have all of the pharaohs and all of these gods and lesser gods later on. So Osiris would be the first of the five gods. He would be the lord and judge of the dead. He would also be the god of vegetation. So he is responsible for, or believed to be responsible for, the flooding of the Nile, which allows for, well, first it kills off a lot of the vegetation already in the area, but when it comes back, it allows for vegetation to grow again. He would be killed and then brought back to life by Isis, and when he was brought back to life, he would become lord and judge of the dead and the underworld with the afterlife. Osiris is often depicted as a man with a tall white crown with red feathers on the side. He has a thin, often braided beard, which would be called a pharaoh's beard, and then he is holding two things. One, a crook, which is kind of like a little staff that then is like a cane at the end, and then a flail, so a stick that then spreads out into a bunch of little like whips. So if you ever have pictured King Tut, he has the beard and he's holding two things. That is essentially what Osiris looks like, but with a crown instead of the headdress that King Tut would have. And then our last one that we're going to talk about is well, our second to last, or close to our last one, is Horus. We're getting close to the end. Horus is associated with the sun, sky, and power. Horus would be the son of Isis and Osiris. He is also the god of vengeance and would later become the god of the pharaohs. This is one that we see switch with Ra and Amun and Aken and a couple of other different gods. Horus would be one of many different gods of the pharaohs. So the story goes that Osiris was killed, Isis brought him back to life, and Osiris would live as the lord and judge of the dead. Horus, one of the sun and sky gods, would come back and seek vengeance for his father's death, and so he would get that vengeance and become associated with power, which is why we see him coming to power and then him becoming the gods of the pharaohs because of that. So he would be seeking vengeance for his father before him and becoming more powerful, which is essentially what many pharaohs would like to have happen. They take over for the person before them and they become more powerful because of that. So he is depicted as a man with the head of a hawk, and then he has a red and white crown. It's a very specific crown called a Bishant, and so this is a combination of actually two different crowns. One was the crown for Lower Egypt, and then one was the crown for Upper Egypt, and then they put the two together. One was red, one was white, and it became this crown, which is often depicted when we talk about pharaohs or the god of the pharaohs. So now our last two, those three were some of the first five gods, and now we have some of the other important gods, some that might be a little bit more popular too. So we have Anubis. So Anubis is the god of the dead. Anubis is associated with embalming and mummification. He is the guiders of soul to the Hall of Truth, where you would be judged before the afterlife. So one of the things with the afterlife that we're going to talk about more about mummification and the Egyptian belief of the afterlife and the underworld and all these sorts of things is your heart would be weighed. Anubis would be an important role in the weighing of your heart, and they would weigh your heart, and if your heart balanced with this scale, then you could go on to the afterlife, and if not, then you would go to the underworld. So he was one of the many different gods of the dead. He would be the one that would guide the souls to this point and help in the weighing, which is why he is associated with embalming and mummification. You pray to Anubis to ensure that the mummification process is successful and you can most effectively guide the pharaoh's soul to the afterlife. Anubis is depicted as a man with the head of a dog or a jackal, and he often carries a staff, one that many different Egyptian gods would often hold. They would often be depicted holding some sort of staff. Our last one, this would be the son of Horus. So Horus was the son of Isis and Osiris, who was the son of Nut and Geb. So our last one is Thoth. Thoth would be the god of writing, wisdom, truth, and integrity. He would be known as the keeper of all information when it came to the gods. He would be the god that knew everything. He was the smartest and wisest of all of the gods. He was the god of knowledge. So Thoth was also the moon god. So it was believed that when the sun would go down, Thoth would keep track of time. And so because the moon god kept count of time when the sun was not up and everyone was asleep, he was knowledgeable about dates and time, and he is why the Egyptians were able to create a very accurate 365-day year calendar. So because of Thoth, they could find out that there was 365 days in a year and create a modern calendar, which is incredibly interesting that they would be able to create a modern calendar with what little information and advancements that they had at the time. So Thoth is often depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, which is a type of monkey, but he is also often depicted as a man with the head of a baboon. Or sometimes he's often just depicted as a baboon. Many of these Egyptian gods would also have a special animal that they would look like as well. So they would look like a man with the head of some certain thing, or like we saw earlier with another one, we would see that they are depicted as just something like a cow. So that completes our 13 Egyptian gods. Make sure that you fill out the information and then go ahead and keep that for yourself. This information, I'm going to make a Quizlet for it. It'll be a part of the quiz. So the quiz will be coming up. It will be Friday. Again, tomorrow we are doing our election, and then afterwards we are going to talk some about the mummification process, and we'll come back to Anubis and Osiris and our different gods of the dead and how the mummification process worked and why we did it, or why they did it, and the purpose of all different parts of it. So I think that is it. I will see you guys tomorrow. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Some extra study sessions in the evening. Just let me know what would be best for you guys. Okay, I think that is it. Have a nice day. Bye guys, I'll see you tomorrow.